Hello everyone, this is the Mapping Inspirational Women podcast in 2024. Today we are in Glasgow Women's Library with Claire Ramjan and Andrea Priestley. And Claire, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, so I'm Claire Ramjan. I am a lecturer at the University of Glasgow in initial teacher education, and I'm delighted to be here.
And I'm Andrea Priestley, and I'm a lecturer in education at Stirling University, and I'm also very pleased to be here at the library for the first time. It's a super spot.
Claire, would you like to tell us about your favourite place?
My students have heard this story a few times. I have a very specific favourite place, and it's tied to lots of aspects of my life and my career. So my favourite place is Loch Lomond. Loch Lomond, for those of you who don't know, is the longest loch in Scotland. It is very close to the Central Belt, which is where I live, so it's easy to get to. But it has had a particular impact on my career, which is why it's my favourite place in lots and lots of different ways. So it's very beautiful. I've done lots of things in and around it. So I've swam in it, I've canoed across it, I've camped on the islands there. But I've also worked alongside the loch in lots of different ways throughout my career. But the reason that it's particularly my favourite place is that it changed the direction of my career. So I was at university aiming to be a scientist, an indoor scientist. I was doing biomedical sciences and had fully intended working in a lab and being in a white coat and investigating parasites and all of those sorts of things. And as part of my degree, we had to do a field trip to Loch Lomond, and this was in January. It was a day a little bit like today, crisp, clear, frosty, freezing, and I sat on a boat with a bunch of other scientists and just thought, this is it. This is all I want to do. And so I changed the direction of my degree, I changed the direction of the courses that I was studying, and I moved towards conservation, ecology, and environmental sciences at that point. And I've basically kind of my career's kind of evolved around Loch Lomond in lots of different ways. It's instrumental in my PhD research, and it's been instrumental in lots of other aspects of my life. So as much as it is one of those places that is very beautiful, it has lots of aesthetic aspects that make it lots of people's favourite place. You can easily get to it, but for me it's got a really personal and professional connection, so that's why it's the place that I go back to as often as I can.
Thank you. Yes, well, I'll talk about my favourite places, I suppose, and they just probably are the hills and the mountains that I inhabit regularly, running up and down and walking up and down, taking my dogs out. And I was just thinking there as Claire was talking about when this started for her in terms of professionally, etc. And I think that when I was, my mum had always talked about going to the lakes, and I was born and brought up in Peterborough, so it's a very flat space and not really been to the hills. And so when I was 14 and fascinated by the Youth Hosteling Association, I bought a youth hostel book and effectively tried to walk across the lakes without a compass and a map. But anyway, it certainly led me into outdoor spaces, and I loved it. And I suppose in terms of it structuring my life, I've always lived where there are places where I can easily get out into the hills without driving, etc. So this has then shaped the types of careers that I've then gone into and the places that I've then visited and stayed in, and that's had a huge impact actually on what I've done when I've done it and in what ways I've done it. So it allows me to reflect, but it also just, I think the light that you get and the types of the sort of the environment that you are in is very personal, but it's also very open, and so it's made me very appreciative of who I am and what I can do, and actually the people that I can do that with.
Claire, would you like to tell us a bit more about the women who have inspired you in entering this career?
Okay, so I am I was a secondary school teacher, so although I'm a lecturer at the moment, I was a secondary school teacher for many years in a range of different places, both in formal education in secondary schools, but also in informal locations in relation to museums and the national parks. The inspirational women that I'm going to talk a little bit about today go right back to my own childhood. So when I was in secondary school, there were 3 women who were heads of department, faculty heads. One of English, one of science, biology specifically at that time, before we had facultised, and we had a year head as well. She was our guidance teacher at the time, but would be the equivalent of a year head now. And they were the 3 only female principal teachers. They were the only 3 female senior teachers within the school. I think there was a female depute. Nobody ever saw her. So she wasn't on people's radar. These 3 teachers were our teachers. They were involved in the subjects that I was most passionate about, and they were involved in caring for us in a particular way. And they were all very different. They were all very expert in their particular fields, different in their characters. They were characters in their own right, and they were people who I think were the first people that kind of said to me without saying to me, "You can do this. This would be fine. There are options here. You can be different types of people. You can be a different type of woman, and you can do this." Up to that point, I think all the kind of principal teachers were all men. They were all of a certain age. They were all of a certain demeanour, and you didn't recognise yourself in them. Whereas these 3 women, in very different ways, they had very different characters, definitely opened up opportunities that I thought, no, I could do that. And they were definitely opened my eyes to opportunities. Very special.
Andrea, do you have similar stories about the inspirational women?
Okay, well, yeah, I think Claire and I had these discussions when we were thinking about inspirational women and inspirational people probably at that point. And it made me reflect on my schooling days and where some of these things came from. And I went to college instead of staying at school because I rejected the school uniform at 16, and so I could go to college, and actually I was motivated to work there and didn't need the structures of school to keep me engaged. So and my physics, I did physics A-level, and my physics tutor was a female, and that's the first female that I'd come across who had actually then taught physics to me, and she was inspirational from that perspective. I remember her telling me that if you got up at dawn, it never rained, and you could have breakfast at dawn when you were camping. I'm not quite sure that's true. But she was inspirational for many reasons, and she was very keen that you could go on and do anything as a female, actually, and any of the opportunities were open to you. So when I went then to do physics at Manchester, and there were about 20 women on the course of 200 people, 200 boys, which was amazing. But on my particular part of it, where I was doing the analysis of science and technology, there were 4 of us, and 2 women and two blokes, which was really nice. And actually, that was quite an inspirational way. I wouldn't have chosen to go and do physics. I didn't think about that, but because she'd encouraged me from that perspective, and because she was in that role, I felt that actually, yes, I could, perhaps that is something that I could go on and do at that point. And in my first teaching job, there was a head of chemistry who was female. And again, these were few and far between still at that point. So, and she was superb actually. But then equally, some of the blokes, they were very encouraged in the way that they saw that they didn't approach the department or how they worked the department in a hierarchical manner. So in actual fact, everybody was encouraged to get on. And although I was the female physics teacher, which was still very much a novelty when I was actually first working in the teaching environment.
When did you start working?
So I was teaching from 89. Yeah.
Sorry. Wow. Much younger than
Yes, I was a wee bit younger at that point, yes. So yes, quite a long time. So, quite a long time, 87, 88, probably 88, 89, and I was teaching at that point, yeah.
Gradually, there are more female physics teacher entering.
Yes, and so when I go out and do placement visits now, I see there are a number of women in promoted posts, etc., and in the physics sort of area as well. So which is really helpful, but still I think there's been an upsurge in women, and certainly when I was at school there was a push for women in science. So that was in the 70s, and there were all these posters on the wall, and there was a huge gathering of getting more women to actually be represented within the science arena. And I thought that there was a sort of a surge and then a dip, and then as we've seen a dip away from science anyway, and less graduates, less people taking science courses, then I'm not convinced that we've got, we've had the representation from women. I think it's coming back, but still there are a number of barriers for females within the science arena, both perhaps within universities, but also certainly within industry.
And that again is reflected through school as well.
Yeah, and through interests and through society and through what we see is happening within society at the moment, yeah.
Now I would like to know a bit more about yourself, how do you see yourself in the world and what keeps you going in what you are doing now?
Thank you. How you see yourself in the world is a very complicated and very big question. So I probably won't do the answer justice at all. I'll talk a little bit about my professional career. But I think, as you're kind of suggesting, that's not necessarily all of a person. So in my professional career, so I am a biology teacher, but I'm an environmentalist, and I would like very much to kind of to feel that those two roles together, and then the work that I do in the classroom and out of the classroom as well. I feel very strongly about engaging the young people that I come into contact with, and now the young teachers, now the kind of the student teachers that I'm working with, in enabling them to feel confident in taking learning outdoors to experience the world around them, wherever that is. So when we talk about environmental education, we very often think about the hills, the lochs, those dramatic, exciting, very natural, very wild places. But actually what's really important for me as an educator is noticing the wild, noticing the natural, noticing the reality of the places where learning takes place for all of our young people. And that might be an inner city school, it might be a totally concrete playground, it might be somewhere that it doesn't appear to have really exciting and engaging nature. But actually when you slow down, you take a moment, you engage with that place, you very quickly notice things that are there. What we often don't have as educators is time or confidence to do that. So the work that I do as a professional is very much to work with student teachers and work with teachers teachers that are currently working within our schools to support them to develop those skills. In terms of the reality of that, teaching is a really busy occupation. There's many kind of demands on your time, there's many demands on your expertise, and it is a real challenge to kind of find the time and find the space to do that. I'm not only a teacher, I am a well-rounded person as well, and one of the other kind of aspects to my role is that I'm a mum. I have two teenagers and an almost teenage child, which feels like 3 teenagers to be fair, with the demands and the organisational challenges that come with that. And it's a really important part of my role and a really important part of my person and my being, to work with my young people, my own young people, to let them be the people that they want to be, whether that's like me or not, whether that's different from the expectations that I might have had for them. They are a big part of that experience. And so I come to my professional life with a personal experience of being a mum, of having the constraints that that places, but also then the opportunities that it shows me in how I'm relating to young people in my class, and knowing the pressures that these teachers that are dealing with those young people have as well. So yeah, they're two kind of key and important parts of where I am at the moment in my both professional and personal life.
What keeps me going? Well, it's sort of where I've arrived at this particular point in time, which is a lecturer in education at Stirling University. Where did I come from to get there is always of interest, I suppose. But in my professional life, where did I start? Well, I clearly went to university, and then actually at the end of that, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So although I'd done physics, I knew I didn't want to go into industry. I'd always been sort of on the animal rights stuff. I'd always thought about rights and people's rights and animal rights and those. So I had quite a socially just mindset at that point, and done quite a bit of activism when I was at university within that. But I needed somewhere to live. So I then found a job, just found a job as a residential social worker, because I thought about social work. And so I went down and did residential social work with children with learning difficulties, 16 to 18. However, it was a very interesting, it was a very powerful experience for me in terms of, especially when I look at these radiators, and I remember standing against one of these radiators and thinking, gosh, I've taken this role. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to offer as a house parent, effectively, to 16 to 18-year-old young men who were doing a life skills course with a school, and they had learning difficulties, moderate to learning difficulties, and basically we were going to be looking after them or working with them mornings and evenings and at weekends. And I soon realised that I'd led perhaps a privileged life in terms of I'd never thought about getting on a bus. I could read a timetable, I could use money, I could get on a bus, I could travel, and these young men had always been ferried to various places. I could read recipes so I could cook and do that, and I'd taken some of those things perhaps for granted. And so I then worked with those young men to do some of those life skills, which was an absolute pleasure. And taught me heaps about what I'd taken for granted, but equally the experiences of many other people within the world were very different to mine. So I'd already started down that journey. And I also thought that actually I was too young to be a social worker. What would I offer people in that particular situation, or in those particular situations, women with 4 kids and goodness knows what other challenges within their lives. And I was thinking that I'm going to come in as a tool to do something. Well, maybe not. So then I thought, well, actually, there's a £500 bursary. I shouldn't say this, should I? For becoming a physics teacher. And I thought, great, I could do that. Maybe I'll have a go at that. I'd really want to work with people. I want to work with children. I like children and young people. I've already started that role. So I'd like to work alongside them. So maybe actually I could take some of those interests I have in science and physics into the classroom and start that sort of teaching journey. So that's where I started with my teaching journey. And but I've always found schools as institutions quite challenging. Clearly the uniformity of them at times I found more difficult. But when I did my teacher training or my teacher education, I did outdoor education alongside that, and worked with young people then in the outdoors as much as I worked with them in science. And of course within science, you can do that. The walls are no barriers really to thinking about how you then, think about science and work with science. So that was quite helpful. So I took that into schools and worked with children and young people in those sorts of areas as well. And so as we went through, then I suppose we moved to New Zealand at one stage, and I taught physics over there, which was also sort of fascinating and in a really interesting place to then learn about different cultures. Yeah. And unless you go and live there, in my experience, you can go and visit places, but you don't do the slow everyday stuff that means that you then experience what they really like to work with people from different cultures, etc. So that was super, but it also offered me an opportunity to get out of the classroom and to work alongside in the special education services. So I did some of that, and when we came back, I was lucky enough to get a job at Save the Children working as an education officer. So I took my teaching sort of experience and skills and went into schools in a different role and worked alongside children and young people in terms of children's rights. So I started to integrate my my interest in rights and people's rights and teaching and education and what education could be for. So what the purposes of education, and schooling for me loses some of that richness that education can actually sort of should, in my eyes, provide. So that was my sort of journey, and then I've ended up, and then I took on, and then I did a professional doctorate, basically part-time, just as all my further studies been part-time alongside teaching full-time or working full-time. So doing a doctorate full-time, I think, is fantastic and a real opportunity. Doing it part-time is an opportunity, it's just different. and you straddle, which is really interesting. And so that's how I then got into working at the university, because then I was effectively working. I did my professional doctorate and got the opportunity to actually then work alongside others in teacher education. And then I sort of transitioned into teacher education. So I was working part-time in schools or part-time in other institutions, and also working at the university. So that was, and I also did a role at the local authority as a children's rights officer. So I spent some time working alongside care experienced young people, and which also was a real privilege, and gave me a lot of insight into different ways in which people experience childhood and family life, and what that means for them in terms of then how their educational experiences are experienced for them, and how inclusive or perhaps not schools are and other places are to people who have different life experiences, and what you might then do to support them to or support institutions to change, really, to understand that we need diverse ways of working with children and young people to make the experiences for them of society much more inclusive, and actually to build on the strengths that they bring then to actually make our society a better place for everybody. So there were certain things there that I have done that have been very powerful in terms of then what I bring into my role at the moment, where I try and work with students to enable them to have a good experience of the educational opportunities that they're trying to engage with at that particular time. So, and in terms of my other experiences, well, I've got obviously my daughter's now, older than that, and she's been integrated really throughout our lives, and everything we've done has been, I think without experiencing her going through nursery and her doing different things in life, your life is just different, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Whether you just have different experiences because now you are trying to access institutions for another person that's very close for you, so you see it from different ways as well, and that broadens the way that you understand people, and actually you understand the spaces that they then go into. But I've also been perhaps very lucky in the fact that I've always been a runner. Well, I picked up running in my 20s because I was asthmatic and am asthmatic, and I couldn't run when I was younger. And as soon as I started to sort of trot about on the road, I was quite quick. I was just lucky. So my first 10K was a sub 40. I've not trained particularly, but I ran. There was somebody in the house that I was living in, and he was a good runner, and he wanted everybody in the house to do a 10K race. So I went out and did ran the streets a bit, and effectively did my first 10K. And I was probably about 38, 40 or something. So I obviously had a bit of talent there that I'd never really picked up on, and so from that, then I started to run on the road. But then, because the hills, the off-road stuff has always been much more appealing and motivating to me, I then started to run on the trails, and with Mark, we then first did our first fell races, and I sort of thought, this is great, I can't navigate, but I do enjoy running around here. I've got lost a number of times, and but equally have been quite successful then on the hill and fell running scene, running for England, Great Britain, Scotland. So I've been lucky in that sense, winning the British Championships, do you know what I mean, and the English Championships. So as a hill runner, been very motivated, but I think one of the things is I've always done it because I just love being out there, and I find no problems with motivating myself to go out in all weathers, I'd have to say. So I will run in the rubbish weather as much as in the snow, which I do love, as much as in the sunshine. So it makes no difference to me, really, what the weather actually looks like.
Just want to run.
I do. I just like being out there for a while. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm very lucky. You come back to somewhere that's nice and warm. I can get changed. If you're doing mountain marathons and other things, then, you know, clearly there's a different end point. So you might then think about what you're running and how you're running. But if you're running just to go back to somewhere that you can get changed into some warm kit, then, you know, I think you're fine. Yeah. So I will run in all weathers at all times. And what I really like doing is just running with my dogs. Do you know what I mean? In the hills. And that's my training.
Every day.
Not so much anymore, but I do walk every day. Well, I go out every day, with the dog. Absolutely, on the hills. I've done a couple of hours this morning fiddling about on the hills in the snow, you know, and I just think I just love it, and I love, you know, I see Brocken spectres, you know, seen so many of those. I'm a passionate advocate for Brocken spectres. And people will know that I dip off to the side and look for these Brocken spectres when the cloud is just below me and the sun is just up, and you're going to get Brocken spectres. I will be finding them. So there you go.
Did that motivate you every day to get up, like, I'm going to find them?
Yeah, well, Brocken spectres not so much because it's a particular situation, but it does motivate me most days, every day to get up and to do something, to go out into the world and just think, yes, I'm just very lucky to be able to do this. I have the time, you know, I'm not committed to other things. Some people are carers, some people have other things. Physically, people have other challenges, but also other commitments that they might not, will take them away from that. And that's absolutely as it is, isn't it? So when you can do these things, I feel very privileged that I can, you know, so I do still. I mean, you know, other people will do them. And of course, one of the loveliest things is that I had just run a fell race with my daughter, you know, which I have to say was her first fell race, and it was wonderful, you know. So that was a real privilege that I could do that. I was still fit enough. She wanted to do it. I mean, it's nothing to do with, you know, it's up to her. I've never pushed her in that way. She developed in her own way and come to that quite, you know, when she did. And that was wonderful. And what a privilege to be able to run with her and do those things. So that makes me smile.
Okay, so what keeps me going in what I'm doing? That's again a really hard question to answer. I just love it. It's really simple. I love talking to people. I love finding out about other people. I'm just basically dead nosy. So from a research perspective, one of the things that I love doing the most is kind of interviewing people and interviewing teachers and children and young people and finding out about whatever it is that we're trying to find out about. So it might be about science education, it might be about outdoor learning, it might be about citizen science, it might be about any of those different things. But ultimately for me, it's about those experiences that those people have in that situation. And so being a researcher for me is just a total privilege. That opportunity that is my job. I get to have to do it, to go and talk to people, find out what is working for them, find out what's challenging. And that's a really lovely aspect of that. So I think what keeps me going, even though academia is a difficult industry, teaching is very hard at times, is ultimately the people. Those conversations that you have, those connections that you make, the things you find out about people that you didn't necessarily expect to know about them, and those relationships that you build that come with shared passions, but also with different perspectives and experiences. And when you learn about what makes someone love what they love, then that shows you different ways of looking at the things that you love too. and that can be a really powerful thing. So talking to people, meeting new people. I've recently changed roles, so the opportunity to meet a whole new set of people, a whole new set of colleagues, a whole new set of students is really daunting, but really exciting as well. So I think that's maintaining those connections, building those relationships is really important to me.
Okay, now we are moving to talk about possible futures.
Which again is a really difficult thing to think of. From thinking about our own futures, thinking about my own future, is impossible to predict. I think, if anything, I've moved roles twice in the last kind of few years, and I came out of school to do the PhD, and so the last kind of 6 to 8 years for me has been really turbulent, but in a really positive way. So lots of change, but lots of really lovely change. And so, but predicting that at the beginning of it, I would never have known what was going to happen. So I'm kind of looking forward. I think the thing that fills me with excitement is just to know to not know what's going to happen. To see what's going to come, to embrace the opportunities that are presented, and just have the confidence and have the kind of backing in myself to go for that and to really kind of make the most of it. But it is a really difficult thing to know what might happen and what changes might happen in your own life that then will kind of direct the way that your personal and professional life might go.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, isn't it? That notion of sort of you don't quite know where things are going to go based on your personal and professional life, because things impact that, exactly. And that shapes what you do, doesn't it? And that. But I think embracing the opportunities, if you can, based on those, your own circumstances, is really powerful. And that's what I would always say to other people is, there's so many opportunities, and you need to see the opportunities though. And actually there are barriers, but it's about how do you then navigate those and think about those and just take those, because that's what always motivates me perhaps to do those different things. The different things that we've done are because I think or we've thought, actually, this is possible. Do you know what I mean? To do to go to New Zealand and to teach out there. Well, I couldn't see myself just travelling. Couldn't quite do that. But if I'd got a job out there, I felt a bit more secure. So actually, I managed the uncertainty by taking a job somewhere else and then living in that space and actually really enjoying what that offered at that point. So I made it manageable for me in the ways, and for us in the ways that we did things together, sort of thing, rather than thinking I'll just travel and see how it goes, because where am I going? And maybe I did need a bit of direction. I do need a bit of direction at some points, but certainly in terms of changing careers and doing other things, I was really privileged to do that. My doctorate, and actually did that alongside, but then also being able to work not only for an NGO, Save the Children, but also then going to work for the council and looking at that in terms of children's rights, and then coming into the universities at the end of 2018. So I've been quite late in entering the universities and being able to come back into teaching, which I've always really enjoyed, actually. So I went into teaching, I really enjoyed working with children and young people and with students, and so feel very privileged that I'm back to doing some of those things alongside that. So and then in terms of where I go from there, well, we'll see. Do you know what I mean? It's what the opportunities arise and how you then be able to take those dependent upon personal experiences.
I want to pick up on what you said about travelling. So I was a geographer, and my undergraduate degree was with geography, and I've always been fascinated with different places. And as I left university and finished my teaching, I thought I want to work somewhere else. I want to be other places and to see the world. And so I did, and I really didn't enjoy it. I do love travelling. I'm going to not say that I don't, but I found living somewhere else, away from my family, away from my friends, away from my support kind of network, really challenging. And I was really not expecting to find that. I was ready to face the world and to be an adventurer. And I was not. I really was not. I'm a homebody. I love being close to my family. I love being close to my friends. And that, for me, when I had my family, was really important, that we were then stable, somewhere within easy reach of grandparents. And that has been a really important part of my life. So I think it's really important for people to know that that's also okay, is that however you find yourself in your life, whether it's what you expect or not, that's totally fine. And the adventurer in you can be satisfied in a range of different ways. So I still do travel. I travel for work. It's one of the things I love about academia, is that opportunity to see different places alongside meeting other people, which is really fascinating. But I don't have to then commit to being somewhere else for any elongated period of time. I get to come home. I get to be where I am happiest and where my roots are and where I'm most comfortable. And that then gives me the confidence to then be adventurous in other aspects of my life. So I think there's different aspects to kind of what it means to be adventurous. I think that's really important for people to kind of see that in themselves. That you don't necessarily have to go halfway across the world to do that. But if you want to, you totally can. And if you find the right way to do it for you, then that's the right way for you, and that's all there is to it. So I just wanted to kind of give a different perspective on adventure and travel. So.
Since we're in the library, shall we end the podcast with a book by a female author?
Perfect. So something that I came to relatively recently, an author that has influenced me through my PhD in particular, is Ursula K. So she's a science fiction author, but we're very much with a feminist perspective and very much with a natural kind of perspective, but it's that kind of world building aspect I really, really love. The one that I read most recently is the word for world is forest, which is a tiny little short novella almost, where there's an indigenous population on a planet, and humans or human type people have come in and are mining that planet, and it's a really just so well observed and such a sensitive understanding of indigenous knowledge, of local cultures, of the conflict that comes when two cultures come together, what happens when there's virtually no women in the story whatsoever, and what happens to populations of men in the absence of women. And it's a really, really beautiful, really challenging and dark story, but really beautiful and really a lovely experience of thinking about the places that you know, and almost alienizing them, almost thinking about how they might feel to someone else, and what other people from other places might see of the place that you're in. And I think she's a wonderful author that challenges the way that I think about my life.
Yes, I would concur actually with Ursula K, having read some of those pieces as well. She does just that, and she's a lovely writer actually, very thought-provoking, with some beautiful stories that I can certainly recognise. But equally, it does challenge the way that I might think, and I do like science fiction and fantasy. So therefore, it fits very much within my genre of reading. I think the other thing that perhaps for me in terms of female writers, when I became, I suppose, more interested in my understanding of broadened out, or my knowledge of who wrote and who were the writers that we might want to engage with, came when I went to university and met other young people, other women who were reading a broad range of literature. So I came across Simone de Beauvoir, and then read on Margaret, Atwood, and other such stuff. And actually, those particular authors have always been very inspiring to me in thinking about women and their role, and how the power structures have been in place, and how that might have impacted people's lives at that time. It gave me different insight into the world by means of which I acted. So very interesting.
Thank you for listening to us, and if you have anyone you think any thoughts provoked by our podcast, please feel free to contact us. Thank you for listening.